Elite design, better comfort, more grip. Our new PureGrip Socks Elite add engineered compression, an anti-blister base, and more grip to keep you locked in. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
Hello and welcome to the return of the SR4U Q&A series, where if you're wondering why I have these scratches on my forehead, I was unexpectedly trampled while laying down by this thing. Where, as previously announced, I'll be making monthly Q&A videos to answer your football boot related questions. So if you have a question that you'd like me to potentially answer in next month's episode, be sure to leave it down in the comment section. And really quickly, before we get into the questions, if you enjoy these Q&A videos, don't forget to drop a like on this one and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. Rusted Cole asks, would you like to see Nike differentiate the Mercurial line again? Amongst the boot enthusiast community, I'd argue it's a pretty popular opinion that most people would like to see the Superfly and the Vapor kind of be their own thing again, and the boot nerd in me would absolutely love to see that. But looking at this from a business perspective on Nike's end, I'm not so sure that it makes that much sense for them anymore. Where, just like Rusted Cole suggested, I think it'd be super cool if Nike went back to like a Teijin synthetic material for the Vapor and then maybe maintain some type of a knitted structure, maybe even keeping the grip knit for the Superfly. That in itself would be enough to differentiate the two lines. However, it would also force people to basically make a choice. And I think in the case of the Vapor and Superfly, this has always been the case. One ends up being more popular and more desirable than the other, which inevitably kind of cannibalizes the sale of the less popular variant. Which isn't necessarily a giant problem for Nike. They're happy to have you buy a Mercurial, whether it's a Superfly or a Vapor, but then I think back to the days when these two boots were legitimately different from each other, and what you also saw was a huge discrepancy in the price tag, where the Superfly was always much more expensive than the Vapor, sometimes nearly half the price, and that's not something I think Nike wants to do anymore. And even if they were to go in that direction, it's unlikely that they would lower the price tag of the Vapor significantly, which means that the price of the Superfly, if it was going to be that ultra high-tech, ultra special boot from a marketing and technology perspective, the price would have to go up. And I'm not sure that the market is ready for a $350 Superfly again. So yes, I would personally love to see the Vapor and Superfly be two different boots again, but I think unfortunately that would inevitably cause the prices to go up, maybe for both, but certainly for one, and that's not something that I think most people necessarily want to see. Jared Lopez asks, what are your game day boots if you still play competitively, and or what are your go-to boots for pickup? The boot rotation these days is a little chaotic given how many new releases there are, so I'm usually just wearing the latest thing as long as I feel comfortable enough to wear them in a match, because getting a blister when you're always wearing new boots is just the most inconvenient thing in the world, and it kind of skews your opinion of different products because you have a blister and it's uncomfortable pretty much no matter what. So blisters are the one thing that I'm always trying to avoid. So if I know that conditions aren't the greatest, especially during the summer when it's really, really hot and it's easier to get a blister, I basically have two different go-to football boots that maybe are kind of boring as far as picks go, but I pick them and wear them because I know that they're just incredibly comfortable and I'm not going to have any issues. Where if I'm playing on grass, these Mizuno Wave Cups that came out a couple years ago are pretty much my go-to. Classic made in Japan kangaroo leather all over the entire upper, super soft, love the look. This is one of my all-time favorite sole plates and stud patterns, and again, they're just unbelievably comfortable. And then if I'm playing on AG, and this might come as a surprise to people, I actually wear the made in Japan Mizuno Morelia 2, which is actually technically an FG boot, but as you can see, the studs are relatively short and fairly large in profile, which does make them pretty AG friendly, at least more so than a lot of actual AG specific stud patterns from other brands. And they seem to be holding up quite well. I haven't had any issues with durability. And once again, all over kangaroo leather, so soft, they mold to the shape of your feet. Comfort is never an issue. So these are the two football boots that I pretty much always have in my bag if I just want to be comfortable. Beach Parking asks, what failed boot technology did you really want to work? Nike's carbon fiber sole plates is kind of an obvious one that I think a lot of people would love to see come back. And I don't think that they necessarily failed because people were sad to see them go. And I also don't think that they were ever as amazing in terms of feel or performance as a lot of people made them out to be. But certainly from a looks perspective, it is absolutely incredible. And it also offers undeniable value. People see carbon fiber and automatically associate that with being expensive. So to have a carbon fiber sole plate on a top-end football boot that they're charging nearly $300 for, I think is actually very justified. However, will they ever bring this back? Probably not. And if they do, I think the bar has been raised in terms of carbon fiber sole plate technology since the Superfly 4 in 2014, which is the last time you could get a carbon sole plate from Nike. The Adidas Predator Power Swerve's tungsten sand striking element, where for those that are unaware, through this clear window that you can see on the sole plate, directly connected to the underside of the actual insole is a little bubble that houses 20 grams of tungsten sand that, as you can see, can move from the back of the forefoot to the front of the forefoot, transferring the weight forward as you strike through the ball, supposedly increasing the power of your shot. Whether or not it actually works remains to be seen, but given that this technology came out 18 years ago, I would love to see Adidas's interpretation of the same concept now. The Mercurial Superfly 2 and 3's retractable and extendable sense studs. Basically, this circular piece through the middle can actually extend or retract by 2 or 3 millimeters, effectively adjusting to the playing surface underneath your feet, meaning that if you need a little bit more traction, they extend out by way of pressure, and if the ground's a little bit harder, they retract by way of ground force. It's really difficult to say how much these actually move because if you push on them, they don't really do anything. But again, given that this football boot came out 15 years ago, this is one of those technologies that I think would be really cool to see Nike give it another go. And of course, Under Armour should bring back the zipper. Mexican Dinosaur Lover 360 asks, as we move on through the years and new boots release, do you think it's a good idea to buy old boots instead of the newer ones? For example, Predator Mutator 19.1 or buy the new Predator 25? I really like this question because it's become a bit of a trend to go back and buy your old favorites to play in again. The football boot resale market is arguably bigger than it's ever been. And like I always say on this channel, if a football boot was good 5 years ago, it's still good now. It's entirely possible that we do have something newer that is actually better, but at the end of the day, football boots are very subjective in regards to the fit, feel, and performance characteristics in the sense that everybody experiences football boots differently. So even if there's an old pair of football boots that I didn't like, if you had them and you really enjoyed them, then your opinion is perfectly valid. That's a great football boot for you because you like the way that they feel. So in that sense, yes, it makes total sense to go back and buy an older football boot that perhaps you once had to play in again, because if you liked them back then, it's likely that you'll like them now. Especially if we're talking about a football boot that's only a couple years old. However, if you're trying to go back and buy a pair of football boots that are now 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years old, I would be very weary of how they're going to feel, because in that amount of time, football boots have changed quite a bit, where I think it's one of those situations where even if you did have a pair back in the way and you have fond memories of them, football boots, believe it or not, even though we complain about them all the time, have gotten way more comfortable in terms of out-of-the-box comfort. They just don't require the break-in time that they used to have. So even though you might have really liked a particular pair of football boots, you might get them on your feet now and say to yourself, wow, these feel way worse than I remember. But that's besides the point, because I think the bigger risk in going back and buying a pair of 10-plus-year-old football boots to play in is they've been sitting around for 10 plus years, stored in who knows what type of environment, and over time, the glues, the plastics, the materials of these football boots do tend to deteriorate and dry out. And once that has happened, when you actually start playing in the boots again, it's entirely likely that they're going to break and or fall apart way more quickly than you would like them to, and way more quickly than they otherwise would have if you bought them when they first came out and were basically first made. And when you're talking about the modern football boot resale market, it's not like you're going to be getting a great deal on an old classic. You're always going to be paying a premium, and if you're paying that premium with the expectation that these football boots are going to last you a long time, you might be a little bit disappointed with how things turn out. Where, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's guaranteed that your old football boots are going to fall apart really quickly, but if you are buying something really old, make sure you really know your stuff and know what you're buying, because there are quite a few fakes out there, even of football boots you wouldn't expect fakes to exist for. And B, like I said, the durability is a huge concern, especially if you're dropping $300+ on a single pair. If you're going out and buying something that's 3, 4, 5, 6 years old even, that shouldn't be too much of a concern. There's absolutely no problem with that. But again, just be aware that buying the really old stuff can be a bit of a risk. Will Manning asks, do you think football boot brands are suffering from a lack of variety in their products? Especially with Nike, looking back to 10 years ago, you could choose between the Obra, Opus, Vapor, Superfly, Hypervenom, and Tiempo, with each boot offering a low and mid-cut variation and something completely different. Now it's just really Mercurial, Phantom, or Tiempo as the low and mid-cut variations that are essentially the same. I think it's very fair to say that the variety in football boots isn't necessarily what it once was, and I think that has a lot to do with the material usage across the board, not just from a brand like Nike, but from most brands at this point. But if we use Nike specifically as an example, between their 3 lines, you have a grip knit Phantom, a grip knit Mercurial, and a synthetic Tiempo, where the Mercs and the Phantoms you can get as highs or lows, meaning that in terms of top end offerings, you have 5 different options, 4 of which are made from the exact same material, or at least a variation of the same material. Where, don't get me wrong, I think the Phantoms and the Mercs do feel quite a bit different from each other, and certainly from a fit and shaping perspective, they do offer a different experience. But at the same time, you have to wonder, if you don't like grip knit, then you're probably not buying a Nike boot. Having said that, the reason why we see less and less variety these days is because of how football boots are marketed and how consumers have behaved when it comes to new and exciting technology or designs. Where, if we use grip knit as a prime example, in 2022, when Nike launched the Phantom GX1, I don't think they expected that to be anywhere near as popular as it was, where for pretty much its entire lifespan, getting a pair of GX1 Elites, whether it was the high cut or low cut, was somewhat tricky. The boots were legitimately sold out their entire run. So is it that surprising that Nike saw, wow, people really are responding to grip knit, let's put that on our most popular line in the Mercurial series and maybe people will respond again. For the most part, I think grip knit on the Mercurial has gone over well, but certainly it makes for less variety. And we see the same thing from brands like Adidas, where I will say across the board with their top end offerings, they do offer a really nice variety, at least more than Nike does. But the Predator comes back with a fold over flap tongue, people absolutely go crazy. Let's put a tongue on as many football boots as we possibly can because people are responding to it. This bandwagon style of designing and marketing football boots is kind of the modern way of doing things, and unfortunately, as long as we continue to jump on these bandwagon ideas that are undeniably super cool, football boot brands are going to continue to offer less variety in an effort to make products that they know have a better chance of selling. Whereas in the old days, they used to make a bunch of different products, two would be super popular, two wouldn't be. They don't really want that scenario anymore. Long story short, as much as it would be awesome for us consumers to have as much variety as possible from every single brand, from a business perspective, it is really, really difficult, if not impossible, to have 4 different, very different styles of football boots and have them all be popular. No matter what, people are going to gravitate to certain models and certain technologies, which is inevitably going to cause these brands to focus more on what's successful rather than what's not. YoDN5JS asks, hey Josh, do you think the Adidas X Speedflow Plus and 0.1 models were the best in terms of performance? And would you find anything as similar in terms of fit and feel in today's market? I know the Speedflows were relatively popular when they were current, but I really do think they went at least slightly underappreciated because both the Plus and 0.1 models were exceptional football boots. They still are to this day. If you want a laceless speed boot, I really do think the Speedflow Plus might be the greatest one of all time. The only other option that I would say comes close in terms of quality would actually be the recently, I guess, discontinued, even though they just kind of changed up the upper a little bit, the F50 Plus. Very different from the Speedflow Plus in almost every single way. I suppose they share something in common in terms of being textile-based laceless uppers, but obviously that sole plate on the F50 Plus with the double construction and the elevated forefoot with those light strike inserts just makes them feel very different from not just the Speedflow Plus, but every other football boot, but certainly in terms of giving you that underfoot responsiveness that Carbitex carbon shank offered in the top end Speedflow models. The F50 Plus does top that in terms of that springback feel, at least in my opinion. And then as far as the Speedflow 0.1 is concerned, that football boot is honestly a bit of a unicorn, where as far as the upper is concerned, that one in particular was just very unique in terms of being so thin, but having this pliability and almost slight elasticity to it, where they just felt so incredibly comfortable. I'm not sure that there is genuinely a true alternative to that. And again, as far as sole plate responsiveness goes, I do think you can get more responsiveness out of the F50 Plus. Granted, it's a very different feel because of that elevated platform. And then the other thing would be Ultra 5 or Ultra 6 carbon with that carbon fiber sole plate. But once again, a very different feel when compared to Speedflow 0.1. So I guess to answer your question, no, there isn't really a true modern alternative to either of those football boots. Lots of great options in the speed category, don't get me wrong, but nothing that I would say necessarily feels similar.